My name's Peter Walton, and this short film is an introduction to my walking tour of historic Jewish Highgate. Jewish Highgate because it's my argument that Highgate is the most interesting historical and cultural part of Jewish London. More important for those reasons than Stamford Hill, Golders Green, the old Jewish East End, the City of London, Edgware, Hendon, and places like that. But before I start explaining why, I need to tell you two bits of history. The Jews came to England with William the Conqueror, and for several hundred years they were quite useful as moneylenders. But in the 13th century, there was a rising tide of anti-Semitism, fueled partly by the Crusades, which saw the Jews as infidels like the Muslims, and partly by a number of blood libels. These were cases where Jews were accused of killing Christian children for their blood, which would then be mixed into the solution for matzahs. Now, they should have known that that would make terrible matzahs. Anyway, by 1290, there was so much anti-Semitism, and the Jews had become so useless to the king because he had already stopped them from earning money as moneylenders, that he issued a proclamation of expulsion, an edict of expulsion. And it came into force on the 18th of July, 1290. I'll read you a little bit from it. Because of their crimes and the honor of the crucified Jesus, the king has banished the Jews as perfidious men. The next question is, why Highgate? Well, Highgate didn't exist until the early 15th century, when the Bishop of London ordered this road to be built. It's now called Highgate Hill, and it goes from the City of London through what we now call Highgate, onwards to the north, taking in the important pilgrim shrine of St. Albans. This road was built because the original road to the north, through Crouch End, became swampy and impassable. Now, having a road here, and a few years later a toll gate, meant that a village could grow up, and it became a favourite place for the city merchants to build their country houses. And gradually, one after another, they started to come here, and when you get merchants, you get pubs, and you get people supplying the pubs and the merchants with food and so on. So a village is born. In 1637, Richard Sprignall, a London merchant, built this fantastically beautiful house. It's Grade 1 listed, and it's now called Cromwell House. In fact, has no connection whatsoever with Oliver Cromwell. The name was given in the 19th century based on a mistake. The house is now the Ghanaian High Commission. Right, back now to the Jews. There are no Jews in England from 1290 until the readmission by Oliver Cromwell in 1656, except for a few crypto-Jews, that is, hidden Jews, many of whom were doctors, and the most famous was Ruy Lopez, who was physician to Elizabeth I, and who came to a very sad end when he was implicated in a plot to poison her. It's thought that he may have been the model for Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. So the Jews arrive here in 1656. Cromwell, of course, was a Puritan. They rather identified with the Jews, and so were happy to let them in. Also, of course, letting the Jews in at a time of increasing international trade was rather good for business. Now, at the same time as Cromwell was opening the doors of England to the Jews, there was a family in Portugal, the Da Costa family, who were wealthy merchants and were involved with helping a local princess, Catherine of Braganza, in collecting a dowry together so that she could marry a man who would become the next King of England, Charles II. The leader of that family at that time was a man called Antonio da Costa. And Antonio had a son, Alvaro, who became part of Catherine of Braganza's court. Catherine of Braganza marries Charles II in 1662, and Antonio and his family come with her as he's a court official. Initially, the da Costa family leased a house in the city of London, but in 1675 they had prospered enough to be able to afford to buy outright this wonderful house on Highgate Hill. And they moved in with, as I say, their large family, and the first thing that Antonio da Costa did was what any sensible family does when it moves into a house. He built an extension, and the extension you can see over the carriage arch to the side of the house. There are a few remnants of the da Costa family still in the house. One is this monogram, this crest, which is carved in a marble and is in the room over the arch. There is also thought to be a row of studs in the floor of this room. It's now covered by a carpet, which probably represents the base of the screen, the mechitza, separating women from men in the synagogue, which means that this room was a synagogue. And that's very significant because it's the first of the 5 synagogues of Highgate. The other remnant which we've looked for in the house would be in the basement. It would be a mikveh, a ritual bath. But so far no one's managed to locate it. There must have been one, and of course Highgate, being at the top of the hill, has lots of underground streams of fresh water, and with a large Jewish family they would have had to have had a mikveh. Of course, at the time they bought the house they were still crypto-Jews, that is, hidden Jews. They were nominally Catholic. That changed when James II came to the throne in 1685. He was a Catholic. England was Protestant, and James II, because of his Catholicism, was very unpopular. So it was sensible for the da Costa family to come out as Jews. They had been accepted as Jews anyway. I think it was widely known they were Jews. And they did very well in Highgate. They flourished. So much so that when Daniel Defoe, the novelist, of course, of Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders, when he did his tour of Great Britain, he visited them in Highgate and he wrote about them. Let me read you what he says. The Jews have particularly fixed upon this town for their country retreats, and some of them are very wealthy. They live there in good figure and have several trades depending on them, and especially butchers of their own kind, to supply them with provisions killed in their own way. Also, I am told, they have a private synagogue here. So the da Costa family prospered in Highgate, and 3 other members of the family bought large Highgate houses: Morton House, Englefield House, and Grove House. And Alvaro's son Antonio married his cousin, Catherine da Costa. She was one of the leading artists of her day. Some of her pictures are on show at the V&A Museum. She was also a well-known intellectual, and she was so well-known, in fact, that the great French philosopher Voltaire came to Highgate to visit her, and there is even a short section of their conversation recorded. She said to him, "Monsieur Voltaire, was not your Saviour born a Jew? And he apparently said, yes. And did not your Saviour live his life as a Jew? Voltaire says, yes. And did he not die as a Jew? Voltaire replied, yes. Well then, Monsieur Voltaire, should you not be a Jew? Voltaire's answer is not recorded, although he does say that Catherine da Costa argued theology very well. Anyway, the da Costas were doing extremely well. They were city merchants. One of them was physician to the king, and they were generally a successful family owning large houses in Highgate. But something went badly wrong. They had invested heavily in the South Sea Company, a company set up mainly to trade slaves into South America. And in 1720, the South Sea bubble burst and everyone lost a lot of money, including the da Costa family. And gradually their holdings in Highgate diminished, and by 1750 we hear no more of the da Costas in Highgate. The only da Costa, of course, left here is Costa's Coffee, which I believe has no relationship to the family we're talking about. Now, normally at this point, I'd get up and lead my group to the second point of interest, which is in Pond Square, the house that was the second synagogue in Highgate and was the site of a school run by Chaim Hurwitz in around 1820, who was a close friend of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the poet. But I'm afraid that's the end of this short film, and I haven't had time to mention some other famous people, mainly Jewish, who were connected with Highgate: Karl Marx, Peter Sellers, George Michael, Elizabeth Taylor, Jerry Springer, Berthold Lubetkin, and Rabbi Solomon Schonfield. I hope you'll join me on one of my next actual tours of historic Jewish Highgate. If you have been, thanks for watching.